right, so the world's changed. Anybody realize that? The world's changing rapidly, right? I've been saying that the world we're going into is not the same as what we've left behind. However, in order to know where we're going, we also have to understand the past. And so I like to understand history to make sense of what's happening today. And so let's go all the way back in time so we can understand things from a first principles level, so then we can build our own education and understand what's going to happen in the future. And so the question is, what is money? Now, my good friend Robert Breedlove has a podcast called What is Money? And he basically spends every single episode discovering what that is. So we could sit here and talk for days about what is money. It communicates value. It coordinates economies. But that's more what it does. But a good money is a medium of exchange. And it's a store of value. And in order to have those things, it has to have good attributes. And so we had things like seashells and rocks and feathers. And so they started as a collectible. And if enough people collected them, they might become a store of value. Today we have fine art, cars, those things are stores of value. But they don't have the attributes to become money, which has to be portable, divisible, durable, recognizable, saleable. People have to be willing to take it from you. All right? Gold was that, and gold emerged, it evolved to become the best store of value. Didn't start that way, but it evolved that way because it had the best attributes, including scarcity. Money has to be scarce. Now, gold was that, but the problem is that gold failed. 1933, Executive Order 6102, they seized it, they stole it, they made it illegal to own it. And the reason why actually goes much further back in time. And we're going to talk about that and we'll build off of that. But it failed, and the reason why is because it became centralized. The problem with gold is that it is not very portable. So when we had to settle trade with my neighbor, it worked pretty good. When I had to settle trade across the ocean, it became very slow, very dangerous, and it caused it to become centralized so we could speed up the velocity by putting debt on top of it, and that centralization always leads to manipulation, which we'll talk about. So gold failed. That's the problem. Now, today, money has become a weapon. Money has become weaponized. Specifically, the US dollar has become weaponized. And so we can see that the governments use our money to steal from us. The current fiat money system that we have, through inflation, they arbitrarily confiscate our wealth. They weaponize it against us, but they also weaponize it against other people that use it. In 2014, they weaponized it, starting to weaponize it against Russia and Ukraine after the coup in Ukraine. We saw in 2015, left article on CNBC said that the U.S. is now waging war on 1/10 of the nations in the world. The U.S. is now sanctioning over 1/4 of the world's populations. You know, about 2 billion adults in the world today don't have access to the dollar. They don't have permission. They're not allowed. It's been weaponized against them. And really, the world changed, back to the beginning slide, the world changed a year ago. February 2022, there was 3 global superpowers in the world with nuclear weapons, Russia, China, and the US, and one of them got their bank account seized. And the whole world was put on notice. Now, when Afghanistan had their central bank, $8 billion in their central bank seized, oh, that's Afghanistan, okay, whatever. When it happened to Russia, every country in the world thought, dang, if it can happen to them, it can happen to us. And so each country now has to start thinking about this. They have to play this out. What happens if my bank accounts get seized? What will I do? What's my risk management plan? And so that's the day the world changed. Now, just a few weeks ago in Singapore, they had a think tank and they met. George Yao, former foreign minister of Singapore, said, quote, "If you weaponize the international finance system, alternatives will grow to replace it." Of course they will. If you guys are too noisy and I kick you guys all out of here, you're going to go congregate somewhere else. You don't just walk out there and die. If you take away Russia's bank account, take away their dollars, they're going to find an alternative. It's not a controversial statement. That's just the way things work. And so when you weaponize it against everybody, alternatives are going to replace it. What kind of alternatives? Well, most people think that history repeats. But that's not the way it works. Remember, the world is changing. The world we're going into is not the same as the one we've left behind. So most people think that it repeats. Now, the one thing that I want to make clear, I was talking with my good friend Brent Johnson before I came up, and we were talking about how people don't understand nuance and they don't understand time frames. So the one question I always want to ask is, if I'm hearing any information from somebody, the dollar's dying, a replacement's happening, okay, over what time frame? So you have to think about this, and you have to understand that what we're witnessing right now is it's a process, it's not an event. Now, I can definitely put a pin on February 2022 to a massive event that happened that escalates the process. But what we can see is that reserve currencies, or I would say what we use as money, has changed many times over the years. You guys have all seen that chart. You're all here at a gold convention. Obviously, you understand this. You've seen that chart. But look at what's happened just recently. Russia decided to make yuan their reserves, 17%. Small, it's not monumental, but it's not nothing. It's a process. The UAE is now issuing bonds in their own currency, friendlies to the US. Egypt is now issuing bonds in yuan, friendlies to the US. Israel's diversifying their FX in yuan. China and India are doing it, right, outside the US dollar. It's a process, not an event. Now, does this mean it's imminent? Does this mean the dollar's days are done? Not today. It's a process, but it's happening. Now, these people are all diversifying into other currencies. The problem is it's still in the FX system. It didn't work out too well for Russia, but that's what's happening. Now, what we also see, we're at a gold convention, we also know, I'm sure all you guys know by now, that central banks are buying more gold than they have in over 55 years. They're stockpiling gold. Massive amounts. Russia just doubled their reserve requirement from 20% holdings to 40% holdings. China just announced they've added over 60 metric tons of gold in the last 2 months. Now, they didn't just add that, they just announced that they have that. But that's a key piece. Why would they announce now that they've added that? And the reason why is because they're all angling to start setting up an alternative system. You've heard about the BRICS nations, 60% of the world's population, creating an alternative Swiss payment system, right? Maybe creating a competitor to the LBMA, the London Bullion Market Association. So what are they angling for? Well, they're angling for a new system. You kick enough people out, or as George Yao said, you weaponize it enough against enough people, and they're going to create an alternative. So what are they angling for? But the problem is these people think that history repeats, and history doesn't. Maybe it rhymes? So let's talk about the rhyme. So it's the same old problem. The problem is that we are going into a new world, and it's not a physical world, it's a world of information. It's a digital world. And so the problem is how do we move from physical laws to man-made rules? That's the crux of the whole problem. That's why gold failed. In order to speed up gold velocity in the 1400s, there was a brand new technology that was created. It was called a ledger. It was a ledger, and the ledger would keep track of who had the gold. If I have this on my hand, who has this? I do, right? It's physical. You all see that. If I give it to my good friend Robert here, he has it in his hand. Now who has it? He does, because it's a physical object, and we all know who has this. But in the world of information, the ledger has to tell us who has it. But who controls the ledger? Who controls the ledger? That's the problem. That's the crux of the matter, because we are in a whole new world. So, this is the problem. The token, physical object, we know who has it. The ledger leads to manipulation, but basically what it leads to is trust. We have to trust whoever holds the ledger. So great. So China, the BRICS, Russia, they're going to create a new payment system. They're going to have a gold-backed currency. Oh, we have a gold-backed crypto, whatever. It doesn't solve the problem. It's the same old problem. It takes us back to a ledger where we have to rely on trust. So if we understand this from a first principles basis, then we understand this doesn't do anything to solve the problem. And I hate to tell you, I'm at a gold conference, don't hate me. Gold ain't gonna fix it. because it doesn't solve the problem of who has the ledger. Who has the gold in the vault? How do I know it's real gold? How do I know it's not tungsten painted? How do I know they'll give it to me? It doesn't solve any of the problems that cause it to fail in the first place. Now, if you zoom out and we look at the world from a historical lens, we can see that the world is deglobalizing. On a pendulum, on a 250-year time frame, the world moves from centralization back to decentralization. 250 years ago was the American and the French Revolution. We rejected the centralization of the monarchy to set up a decentralized government. 250 years before that was the Protestant Reformation, rejecting the centralization of the church and state. And we are at the same point in time. And it's easy for anyone to see that we are at peak globalization. World Economic Forum, World Health Organization, the UN, the IMF, and blah, blah, blah. You get it. And now we're deglobalizing. The WEF just had their big meeting in Davos last week, and the big topic is globalization dead? The French President Macron got on stage and said, we need to have globalization. We need to have one world government, because how else will we solve climate change? How can we solve the climate change if we don't all have one world government? But globalization is dead. And as the world continues to deglobalize, as we go from a unipolar world to a multipolar world, that means less trust between each other. That means less cooperation between each other. So then how does the world work? Now we're going to fly, we're back to what we did in the history, flying planes full of gold or sailing across the ocean so they can sink or be taken over by pirates. Is that what we're doing? If you study history, you'll know that through thousands of years of history, what changes history is really technology. There was a brand new piece of technology. It was called a horse stirrup that allowed soldiers to get on a horse and fight from a horse. And now a knight could take out 100 or 200 serfs, which allowed centralization of the serfs and the knights and the kings. But then in 1500, we had a new technology called the gunpowder revolution. And now one serf or one peasant could take out 100 knights, which led us back to decentralization. And so it's always technology that changes things. And we have a new technology now that fixes all these problems. Basically, about every 50 years, there's a new technological revolution. About every 50 years, and that's where we are today. So we have a new technology that solved this problem, and the revolution is decentralization. As the world is decentralizing, we have a technology that does that. You know, you wouldn't understand it in a world today where we have, fiat money trying to solve a bunch of problems that don't need to be solved. But typically, solutions are supposed to come to problems. And we have a big problem, and that's centralization. Centralization leading to manipulation. We can't solve the problems that we have with the old tools. But we have a revolution, and it's decentralization. And so, as we go into the new world, as the world becomes deglobalized, as the world continues to lose trust, as the world realizes that I can't trust my money in the bank because if Russia gets theirs seized, what hope do I have? I have none. As the world continues to move to multipolar and we don't trust each other, it's like the old the movie with the drug dealers, like, give me the drugs, no, give me the money. Like we don't trust each other. What do? Well, let's use a neutral person, like the SWIFT system. Oh, except for that's not too neutral anymore, is it? And that's the point. So it's almost sort of like we might need like a decentralized ledger that nobody could control. Because what was the crux of the matter when we moved into the information age? Was who controls the ledger. We can't trust anybody with the ledger. They're going to say they have more of something than they do. They're going to prevent or stop or block me from sending somebody to the ledger. They don't give permission to use the ledger to this group of people for whatever arbitrary reason that we deem. We can't trust the ledger, but in the information age, we require it. And so we need something neutral. And it needs to be decentralized in a way that nobody can control it. Because we're in the physical age. And it needs to be permissionless. Anybody could join it. No one has to apply for permission. There's no one to give permission. Anyone has access to it. It needs to be, of course, borderless, because as the world continues to break apart, become decentralized, how do we do global trade? It needs to be borderless, and it needs to be trustless. We can't trust anybody with the ledger. And it must also allow for all the attributes of money. Going back to what does make a good money. Now, gold had the best attributes, except for it failed in a couple areas. Mainly, it failed because it's not portable. It doesn't work across the internet. We can't transfer it that way. And because it's not portable, and it's not that scarce. It's more scarce than silver. It's more scarce than copper, but it's not the most scarce asset. One of my favorite Austrian economists, Mises, said that in the world of economics, there's no such thing as a constant. Because if we use economics, we use oil, we use wheat, we use gold, but there's no such thing as a constant. The supply is changing all the time. But today, we have a technology. If you don't know what I'm talking about, anybody know what I'm talking about, maybe? What? Go ahead, shout it out. Oh, yeah, maybe Bitcoin. So we have something that has a constant, 21 million. There will never be any more. Mises was right. We never had a constant in economics, but we do today. Now we have Bitcoin. We have a fixed supply cap. It's a decentralized ledger. It's permissionless, borderless, it's trustless. Now, I want to make a key point here because we got a bunch of gold bugs. I was a gold bug. I still am. I still own gold. I still buy gold and silver miners. I still talk about them on my channel. Anybody watch my channel, Mark Moss? All right, good. If you don't, then go ahead and pull it on your phone and subscribe real quick. But I still talk about gold and silver. I like them. But I want to make a key point here. I'm talking about Bitcoin and not cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin, not cryptocurrencies. Now, Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency, but we talk about them separately. Just like we would consider gold different than metal. Is gold a metal? Yes or no? Of course it is. It's a precious metal. But is it the same as all the precious metals? No. Why not? Because it has other attributes that make it unique. Just like Bitcoin has attributes that make it unique. So, one of my favorite analysts, Lynn Alden, says to equate crypto with Bitcoin is to misunderstand both. And again, going back to gold, you would also say the same thing. If I said that gold and aluminum are the same, would you believe that? If I said gold and chromoly or gold and palladium, no, of course, they're all different. You can't use them interchangeably. They're different, which is why we're here. We're gold bugs. Now, it's not just me. It's not just Lynn. Fidelity, one of the largest asset managers in the world, they said Bitcoin is fundamentally different from any other digital asset. The next question to ask would be, is it cheap or expensive? What a lot of people want to ask me all the time is, Mark, is it the bottom? Should I buy now? Well, is gold at the bottom? Did you catch the bottom? Anybody catch that falling knife? No, and the reason why is nobody knows the top or the bottom until we're looking backwards on an asset. So what we do is we can't buy the bottom. We can't time the bottom. We can buy the bottom through dollar cost averaging. So what we do is we look at assets and we try to ask ourselves, are they cheap? Are they expensive? We don't know the bottom. We don't know the top. Now, it's cheap. Now, could it get cheaper? Sure. Could it stay cheap for a long time? Sure. But we only know when they're cheap or expensive. There's a dozen metrics that show if Bitcoin is cheap or expensive. And I got 60 seconds left. So let me show you 5 charts in 60 seconds. 1, we can look at Bitcoin through on-chain data that shows the last time a Bitcoin moved and what the price was at that point. And what we can see, we take the last move price divided by the supply. It puts us where we are right now today. We can see the profit and loss of the last move, where I bought it, and where the profit was to the next time I moved it. And we can see on the far right, we are at all-time lows. We can see the market value to realized value. They call it MVRV. And we can see when Bitcoin is overvalued or undervalued. And you can see all the way on the far right, we are at one of the most undervalued times in history. We can look at it from the average price over 4 years or a 200-week moving average. And it's never declined below that price floor. Pretty much every time it's gotten down to this level, it's gone on to make historic buying opportunities, 800% returns, 1,600% returns. But if you're thinking of those types of returns, you don't understand it. My time's up. I'm buying Bitcoin, so my kids and my grandkids will own my Bitcoin. Just like my kids and grandkids hopefully own my gold and my real estate as well. And that's it. I'm out of time. Hopefully you enjoyed that.